Welcome back, Hope City Online. We're in our second week of this teaching series called Strapped, God's View of Our Finances. What do I do when I feel like I'm overextended, overdone, I can't take it, it's too much? And how do I put God back in the center of my finances? Or maybe for the first time, give God room in my finances so that I can begin to serve Him and make my money really serve me. What if I could make my money work for me instead of me always working for just a little bit more money? Now, when we were together last week, we talked about this idea of not falling in love with money, putting our money to work for us instead of just always working for our money, and then trying to find a way to find a balance in our lives where we can really start getting to the place where we can, not be living beyond our means so much, because what we discovered as we were talking last week together was we don't really have an income issue. What we have is a lifestyle issue that stems from a spiritual issue. And that's when we try to reach beyond what we're capable of and what we have available to us. And so for most of us in American culture, we're doing that with credit card debt. We're doing that by financing things that we probably really have no business getting in the first place. And it's a real lack of spiritual maturity, to be honest with you. I had a moment in my life where I kind of crashed up against this, and I felt like God really spoke to me, and He really wanted me to start acting my wage. I didn't say that wrong. I said it right. It's not acting my age, it's acting my wage. Like, you need to live within your means and be appropriate to what it is that you have available to you. And if you're always constantly living outside of that, you're going to find yourself in difficult situations. Now, all that being said, we're not just coming at this from a financial perspective. This is a spiritual issue. Probably the number one and number two sins of humanity when it comes to the local church is consumerism and materialism and getting bought into and caught up in those sin patterns and those brokenness. And so what I'd like us to do today is to go to a passage of scripture that will really help us start acting our wage when it comes to what the Bible values. And so, if I'm going to start acting my wage, I'm going to have this biblical worldview. So grab your Bibles and go with me to Proverbs chapter 13. And we're going to look at just 8 verses. I like to look at Proverbs, the book of wisdom, from the vantage point of what kind of information do I want to pass on to my children. I hope that when my kids are grown, that they'll pick up phrases, statements, and sayings that have been things that I've imparted to them. I try to say things that are proverb worthy to my children so that they stick and they're memorable. I try to say things to you guys on a regular basis, whether you're watching online or in person, that are proverb worthy. Like, you would write them down. You'd go, ooh, that's good. I'm going to remember that. And then I'm going to use it and say it to somebody else. In Proverbs chapter 13, it's this amazing statement about how to be appropriate in your life. And so it's this kind of all-inclusive list of things that you should be paying attention to, and we're going to look at them really quickly together. It says, a wise son heeds his father's instructions, but a mocker does not respond to rebukes. From the fruit of their lips, people enjoy good things, but the unfaithful have an appetite for violence. Those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin. And then he says the sluggard, or the lazy person, has an appetite that's never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. The righteous hate what is false, but the wicked make themselves a stench and bring shame on themselves. Righteousness guards the person of integrity, but wickedness overthrows the sinner. And so it's just like one after the other of almost tweetable statements about how to live your life and what to be paying attention to. And then you have verse 7. It says that one person pretends to be rich, yet has nothing, and another pretends to be poor, and yet has great wealth. A person's riches may ransom their life, but the poor cannot respond to threatening rebukes. And so, in other words, this idea of verse 7, the idea of, if we pretend to live beyond our means, if we use financing and credit cards to posture and pose, it's a very immature way to go about our lives. It isn't authentic. It isn't God-centered. It isn't focused on. And so if we're like, well, if I had that car or that watch, or if I lived in that house, if I could make people believe, and maybe we don't even logically, intellectually articulate that to ourselves, but the voices in our head that tell us that we need to do these things, we need to buy these things for our children, and we need to have this level of lifestyle or expectation, what's happening is that we're living maybe beyond our wage. Let me like kind of paint it for you like that. I talk with a lot of young adults often, and there seems to be this current phenomena, and it's always been an issue with young and old, but it's becoming more and more, more and more regular that I'm having these conversations where young adults who are in their early 20s, mid 20s, they want to have the life that they're used to. So for example, kids are just living at home longer now. So kids are like in their 25, 26, 27 before they move out, and they look at their parents' house, and their parents have a 4-bedroom house, and it has a pool, and they have 2 cars and a motor home, and they've lived this certain lifestyle as they lived with their parents, but their parents didn't always have that stuff. And so what's happening is that they want to live beyond their wage, right? Beyond their age. And it becomes problematic. It becomes problematic because if you're not careful, and some of us who are even older bought into these lies a long time ago, that we started to embrace the value, we refused to embrace the value of self-control, and then what happened is we kind of like crashed and burned. And so we've got way more debt. It's crushing. We can't breathe. We've been trying to catch up with someone else who was maybe ahead of us for far too long. And so if you look at what Proverbs has to say, Proverbs 25:28 says, like a city's walls who are broken through is the same as a person who lacks self-control. So when you spend beyond your means, what you're doing is you're not letting common sense self-control, right? And one of the fruits of the Spirit, one of the signs of spiritual maturity, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and what? Self-control. One of the fruits of the Spirit can actually help you when it comes to your finances. I mean, we live most of our lives, even though we're supposedly grown men and women, we live most of our lives like little children. Well, I want it, and I want it right now, right? We just do it differently. Like, there's a difference, I suppose, there's a major difference typically between the way men spend money and the way women spend money. I don't know if you're married or not, but generally speaking, and this isn't fair, but it's just a generality, women will spend lots of money in small quantities. My wife and I, whenever we go to Target, she likes to stop in she calls it the dollar section. There used to be a section in the front of Target where everything was $1. Now it's still there, that section of random selections, but nothing there is actually $1. And so we go in and we're like, oh, I'll get this and I'll get this and I'll get that. And it's all in the dollar section, but it's $3 and $5 and $7 now. And so then what happens is every time we go to Target, we buy $3, $5, or $7 for the stuff that we don't need. This phenomena happens when you go to Costco. This phenomenon happens when you walk into the big box store. Generally speaking, that's one way that we waste our money. Now, guys, we do it a little bit different most of the time. We don't necessarily nickel and dime ourselves to death, but instead what we do is we'll just kill you in one fell swoop. Like, we'll go out and we will buy an exhaust system for our truck that is like, a $5,000 exhaust system. We don't go buy a little air freshener and a seat cover. We go and buy that big expensive piece that is under the truck and no one's going to ever see it, but you'll hear it, that's for sure, right? And even though it might be different, the bottom line is we're still acting very immaturely. Now, it's not that if you can afford to get that, you shouldn't get it, or that you aren't allowed to buy yourself an exhaust for your truck or spend money that is extra on the things that you need. It's that, are you doing it in a place where you have self-control? Are you making your money work for you, or are you working for your money? So if you're going to start acting your wage, you have to embrace self-control. These are biblical values. If you're going to start acting your wage, you're going to have to embrace the value of sacrifice. Hebrews 12:2 says it like this: fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Jesus saw a task that needed to be done, sacrificing his life for the sins of humanity so that you and I might have freedom. And so because of that, this biblical mandate for us to be like him, we need to embrace the biblical value of sacrifice. And most of the time, I'm going to be honest with you, we're not willing to sacrifice because that lack of maturity says, well, what I want, and I want it now. We live in a very on-demand, microwave, fast food drive-through culture where if I want something, I should be able to get it fast and it should be easy. I should be able to swipe my card. I should just be able to put it with one touch in my Amazon cart and not have to worry about it again. I could set it up to always come every month at the same time and not even think about it. And we live in a world where that working hard for it, sacrificing for it, saving up for it no longer becomes reality. We put everything on our plastic. Now again, I'm not trying to sound like an old man who is trying to long for the glory days of piggy banks. I'm just saying that there's some truth in what Scripture's teaching us about self-control and sacrifice. Let me put it to you like this. Sometimes you have to give up something that we love for something that we'll love even more. Sometimes you have to let go of something that would be nice so that you could have something that's right for you. Sometimes you have to let go of something that would be good because you really want God's greatness in your life. Now here's what I mean by that. Sometimes you have to say to yourself, I just can't afford that right now, and I'm not going to use my credit card to buy that. And here's why. Because if you're not careful, you'll slowly, over time, stack up so much credit card debt that it will bury you alive. Years ago, my wife and I, we had a credit card to every major department store you could imagine. And I know even that phrase department store makes me sound old. Those don't even exist really anymore. But there used to be in our mall in El Cajon, there was a Sears, there was a Montgomery Ward's, there was a JCPenney's. There was at one point in time, there was a Mervyn's, right? Like all of these stores. And we had a credit card for all of them. And so when you have a credit card for all of these places, like you buy stuff that you can't afford and you don't just use your Visa. You're like, well, I'll just put that on my Mervyn's card. I know some of you are like, what the heck is Mervyn's? I'll put that on my Sears card or put that on my Target card. Next thing you know, you have all of these small debts. They're not huge, but they stack up and they add up. And I'll be honest with you, in short amount of time, Jennifer and I racked up debt. As a very young married couple with 2 kids at the time, we racked up a massive amount of debt, and it was quick that debt became over $14,000. So we had about $14,500, and we were paying a little bit more than 18%. We were young, so our credit was probably closer to 21 to 23%. So like if you think about it like that, our minimum payment on that credit card debt was somewhere around, if we just paid the minimum, like the 20, the 30, the 15, the 10, right, on all those little credit cards, it was somewhere around $217 a month is what we were paying on those little credit cards. And so I want you to think about this. If I would have just continued to pay the minimum, if somebody wouldn't have had this conversation that I'm having with you right now and pointed out the biblical reality of acting your wage, right? Using self-control and having a sacrificial lifestyle, then I would have paid for that. Look at this now. For that $14,000, at 18% interest, paying the minimum payment of $217 a month, it would have wound up costing me $104,000 over the course of 40 years. Do you wrap your head around that for a second? I'm just going to leave that there for a second. That if I would have just paid the minimum payment on that $14,000 and even if it was 18%, which is closer to what my credit card rating is right now, what my percentage rating is now, even though just paying that, it would have taken me 40 years and it would have been $104,000. If you are not careful, credit will kill you. It will bury you alive, and you will start serving money instead of having money serve you. Now flip that upside down. Because at the time, when I realized that I had $14,000 in debt, I couldn't even really fathom $14,000. And we started arguing and fighting over how did we get here? And honestly, like the blame shifting started. Well, why did you buy that? Well, why did you get that? Well, how come you did that? And it was just a matter of, well, we needed it. We had to have it, right? And some of the stuff was true. We needed it and we had to have it. And then most of it, though, was not. Most of it was, well, we spent all of our money on this, and so then we had to buy the things that we needed with that card. And it's what we would do. We would take our cash from our paycheck and we would go out to eat with it, and we would go hang out with friends and we'd live it up, and then we'd realize, oh heck, we need to buy diapers, and so then we would just use our credit card to buy the diapers. And so even though the credit card was buying quote unquote essentials, it was because we were living beyond our means. We weren't acting our wage. But what if I could take that $14,000 of debt that I stacked up, and what if I could have squirreled away $14,000 to invest? Now, again, I know even for most of us, right now, in the current state that I'm in, if you said, Eric, do you have $14,000 that you could give me to make this investment? No, I don't have an additional $14,000 that I could just pull out and make an investment in that isn't already invested or isn't already worked or tied up in something else. But I'm just saying, like if I would have taken that same amount of energy, effort that I used to stack up the debt and instead reversed it and squirreled away the money and then decided to make an investment with that money, 14,000, check this out. With the S&P 500 index, about 9.8%. It ranges from 8 to 12%, give or take. So the average yearly percentage rate that you would make if you were to invest that at 9.8%, if you were to invest that $14,000 over the course of 40 years, you'd have $610,000, almost $611,000. So here's the difference. You ready? If you work for your money, right, you wind up in the negative. But if you figure out, because this is a biblical principle, if you figure out how to make your money work for you, you wind up exponentially in a better position. The same amount of time, remember God enabled all of us with time, talent, treasure, testimony, right? And how you leverage your time, that's the 40 years, right? Your talents, that's what you use to make that money. Your treasure, that's the money that you've made. That tells you what story, your testimony you're going to have at the end. Are you going to have a testimony that it took me 40 years and I had to pay $104,000 because I owed $14,000? Or are you going to have a testimony that I invested $14,000 and it made me over the course of 40 years $610,000? See, all of a sudden that proverb that I throw at you every week, time, talent, treasure, right? Testimony. All of a sudden, it's got legs, doesn't it? Now let's go a step further, right? This is like advanced investment. We aren't all there yet, right? You can take, if these numbers don't work for you because the scope of these numbers are bigger than you can wrap your head around, then change the numbers. It still works, right? So let's say that now that I'm not 24 and I'm 45, let's say that I take this $14,000, right, and I've invested it over the course of 40 years, and now I'm no longer making that minimum payment of $217.93 because I'm debt-free. What if I took that minimum payment and I started investing that every month over the course of 40 years at that same 9.8% on the S&P 500? Now what happens, right? That $610,000, that testimony, right, shifts and it becomes $1,755,000 over the course of 40 years. What does it take to do that? Self-control and an attitude of sacrifice. I have to say no to the little things so I can say yes to the bigger thing. I have to say no to the instant gratification so that I can have an opportunity to say yes to something powerful, something amazing. If I'm going to start acting my wage, I have to embrace this biblical value of self-control, sacrifice, but then I also have to embrace the value of long-term planning. This is probably the hardest one for most of us. We just want to live in the here and now. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus is teaching and he says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost and see if you have enough money to complete it? Nobody wants to start a project and not be able to finish it. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to start a project and not be able to finish it. And that would be a bummer to like decide you're going to build a house. You're going to build the house of your dreams. And then you lay the foundation. You do all the groundwork. You lay the foundation. You stub up the plumbing. And then you're like, well, that's it. We don't have any money left. I mean, it doesn't do you any good. Like if you're planning on getting married, it doesn't do you any good to pay for the caterer, pay for the DJ, pay for the decorations if you haven't secured the location. You spend all your money on a catering and a DJ and you don't have a location, well, what are you going to do? Now I'm out of money. Or I got the location, I got the DJ, I got the caterer, but I don't have any money left for tables and chairs. There's something about being wise enough to plan, wise enough to budget, wise enough to make good decisions, right? If you keep reading in Proverbs 21:5, it says that the plans of the diligent lead to profit, and surely as haste leads to poverty. In other words, when I make plans and I'm diligent about what God's entrusted to me, my ability, right? If I use my time and my talents, right? Then I can actually amass wealth. There's nothing wrong with wealth. There's just something wrong with being in love with wealth. Nothing wrong with money. It's just I don't want you to fall in love with money. But when I'm hasty, in other words, when I'm impatient, when I'm quick to make decisions, when I don't make wise decisions, when I don't take my time, that's when I lose. Anytime somebody tells you this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, you need to do it now, generally speaking, I say no. I can't tell you how many times my kids have came to me and said, Dad, we have to buy this, and if we don't buy it right now, we're not going to get the deal. And I'm like, yeah, well, then I guess we're not going to get the deal. If it's like, if I don't pay for it today, then I have to pay more for it tomorrow. Well, I'm not going to do that. So I've developed what I call a strategy of pray before I pay. And here's what I mean by pray before I pay. Just as a general rule, if something is under $100, just pray about it for a day. If it's something, and I'm not talking about like your light bill. You need to pay your electric bill, okay? I'm talking about if I want to buy something that's extra. It's not lights, gas, water, food, car payment. It's not that stuff. If I want to buy myself, let's say I want to go buy myself a new pair of shoes that I don't need. I just want them. I have 3 pairs of shoes already, and I want a new pair of shoes. And so before I buy them, and you're like, Pastor, are you really telling me that you pray before you pay for a new pair of shoes? Yeah, because I want to make sure that before I go and buy myself a 4th pair of shoes, that God's not encouraging me to buy somebody else a pair of shoes. So even when it's under $100, I strive, I try, don't always get it right. I try to pray before I pay. Another rule of thumb, if it's more than 100, but it's less than 1,000, give yourself a week. If you're going to spend $600, $700, $900 on something, give yourself a week. Like, pray about it. God, is this a good choice for my family? Think about it. Do I really want this? Like, is there something better I can do with this? It's not that there's anything wrong with going and buying yourself something really nice. Like, I'm going to go buy myself a new watch. Okay, great. And so I want to buy this watch, and I've had my eye on it, and it's, like $500, $600, whatever it is. You want to go buy that new watch? Good for you. If you got the money in the bank, you've been saving up, you're debt-free, you're thinking about buying that. Did you pray before you pay? And then it gets to a place where you're starting to spend more than $1,000. Like, give yourself some time. Because here's the deal. If you're going to spend $1,000 on something, do you have on some item, right? On some trip, on some airfare, right? Do you have that $1,000? How long did it take you to get that $1,000? How long will this thing that you bought for $1,000 last you until you need another one that costs $1,000? Are you going to be satisfied with that new laptop or that new computer or that new watch or that new pair of shoes or that new piece of jewelry or that new trip to vacation to here or that new whatever, right? And how long will you be happy with it until you have to replace it with another one? So slow down. Have some self-control. Have a heart that realizes that if I sacrifice now, it'll mean benefits for others later. Embrace that value of planning. Like, if you're gonna buy something that's expensive, that it's okay to save for that. It's okay to put money away and appreciate the fact that you did it. The reason I say that is, if you're going to have this value of planning, there are 2 baby steps. And really, I'm gonna talk about these 2 baby steps for the remainder of our time together. There are 2 baby steps that I think every person should start taking. The first one is this. You should try to save $1,000 for emergencies. You should have an emergency fund. And again, I say baby steps. I would love for you to have an emergency fund that's closer to 6 months worth of your income, right? But that just seems undoable. So let's start with something. And if $1,000 seems like it might as well be $1 million, then start with something smaller. But a baby step for you to finding your way to financial freedom, to finding your way to financing yourself, is to have this biblical principle of planning. So start squirreling away, start putting away a little bit of your paycheck each week into a separate account, separate from your checking account, not in your mattress, in a separate checking account or separate savings account until you have that $1,000 emergency. And then step 2, that's a baby step. Now, again, I'm going to tell you this snowball effect. That's what I call it. I call it the debt snowball. I learned this from taking a Dave Ramsey's course. It's called Financial Peace University. We offer it here at Hope City. If you would like more information about how to get into or sign up for a Financial Peace University, there's going to be a link in the comments below. There'll be a link now, and there'll be a link at the end of the service, and you'll be able to sign up for a Financial Peace University. If enough of you are interested, we'll start one right now. We won't even wait. We'll just get the people together and we'll start one. This debt snowball is a total and complete game changer. So I put some stuff up on here. It's a bit fictitious. I don't have the original debt that I owed sort of thing, but I want to give you sort of like something to work off of. The debt snowball is super easy. You can just open up a spreadsheet or take a piece of paper and you can just draw a grid and you can make your debt snowball. And then what'll happen is, like a snowball that's rolling down a hill, it gathers and picks up more snow and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You've all seen the cartoon before where one little snowball falls and it rolls down the mountain until it's this giant snowball that knocks out the villain in the cartoon, right? That's the idea of this debt snowball. So here's an example. So let's say you have a Lowe's credit card and you owe 18%. That's your interest rate on that Lowe's credit card. The total owed is $450 and your minimum monthly payment is $50 a month, okay? Here's what we're going to ask you to do. We're going to ask you to try to save from your spending, right? From your extra spending, $200. What this is going to help you do, and again, if that $200 number is too crazy for you to think of, then it's fine. I just use that as a number that I could work through. I could probably find $200 extra if I was careful. If I didn't go out to eat as much, if I didn't buy as much Starbucks, if I didn't, buy that pair of shoes or this thing, I could probably find a little bit more and do that. So if you could find that $200, you take that $200 plus that $50, and you start paying that $250 in 2 months. You could have that $450 paid off. Does that make sense? Right? It's pretty easy. So then what you do is you go to your next card. So I have a debt owed of $650 on my Target card, and I take that $30 minimum monthly payment, and I take that $250 because this is now paid off, right? Meanwhile, I've been paying the minimum payments on all of them to the best of my ability, right? And then what I do is I take that Target card, and I take that $250, and I add it to the $30, and now I'm paying $280. At $280 a month in about 3 months, and now I've paid off my Target card. So I'm 5 months into my debt snowball, and I'm now free from 2 of my debts completely. So in 5 months, now this otherwise would have taken me years to just pay one of them off, right? So I'm in my debt snowball, and I'm really not going out of my way with any extra money except for that $200. I found $200 by having self-control, right? Valuing sacrifice. I'm going to sacrifice now so that I can celebrate later, right? And I embrace the biblical value of planning, long-term strategic planning. So I find myself in this situation. So now I can take that $280 that I've paid off of these 2 credit cards, and I can snowball that into the money that I owe my parents. It's 0% interest. So I don't owe my parents that money, but you get it. So you owe your parents some money, $1,600 you owe your parents at $200 a month. So you debt snowball that in. And so now I have $480 a month that I can pay towards my debt snowball. So you start to see how it starts to compound. And then, so then I'm at, 2 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, right, later. So now I start to get through all of this, and now I'm at the big ones, right? So I have a school debt. I still owe $9,000. Let's say it's 6% interest. You got a killer rate going on your school loan. I'm paying $200 a month. And so now I can actually throw $910 at that, plus the $200, that puts me at $1,100 and change a month at my school debt. And here's the deal. I paid off, right? If I would have just paid the minimum payments on all of this, it would have taken at least 120 months, right, to pay off all of this debt. But I quickly paid off all of this debt. You could by using this snowball rubric, right? You could pay it off in 21 months, right? That's a difference of 99 months. You hear me? So in less than 2 years, you were able to be debt-free when you would have had all that debt for years. And so now not only are you debt-free, but now you have $1,100 a month that you were used to paying to just debt payment. Now you have $1,100 a month that you can invest. You have $1,100 a month. Not that you can just waste, that you can invest. You can start doing something with it. So what would that look like? If I was to take that additional, right, $1,100 and change, and I invested it 8%, let's say that I'd, like pretty middle of the road, S&P 500, right? And I invested that for that difference of that 99 months, right? Then what would happen, right? I would make $153,000. This is why I say act your wage. Act your wage means that if I could have some self-control, some sacrifice, and some long-term planning, that before I am as old as my parents, I may actually have enough money put away to start compounding wealth. Pastor, this doesn't seem like a very biblical conversation. I'm going to tell you something right now. Jesus actually talks about money and finances and being responsible with our finances as much as he talks about, if not more than he talks about the concept of love, family, and kindness. Why? Because the love of money is the root of all evil. And so it's the number one way that the devil can get a foothold, that he can really, really mess us up. And so when we talk about this idea of the debt snowball, I'm telling you so that you can be debt free. I'm telling you so that you can, in a short amount of time, shorter than you would if you just left yourself to your own devices, with a minor amount of self-control, self-sacrifice, and planning for your future, you could begin to take control of the other 90%. As Christ followers, we're always talking about this idea of the goal being for us to tithe, to give 1/10 of our income, to build the local church, to fuel and fund the ministries of the church. And then many of us strive to give offerings over and above that tithe. And the reason that most of us are unable to do that is because we don't have a godly perspective of our finances. In fact, tithing is way less about the gift that you're giving and way more about the motives and intentionality and the blessing that you're walking in, that you're living in. This blessing of generosity, tithing is just one little tiny nuanced piece of generosity. There's so much more to it. And so when we talk about this paying off and these payments, we're talking about moving from a place of being strapped and learning to act our wage. And so instead of being strapped, I'm now living in a world where it's a sustainable lifestyle, that I can be generous and kind and loving and helpful because I no longer am strapped. I'm no longer in bondage. I'm free. I'm not in debt to someone else. Free to run, free to have fun, free to live, right? Proverbs 6:5 says it like this. I love it. And this is probably one of Dave Ramsey's most famous verses that he loves to quote. He says it like this, that it's gazelle-like freedom. And he says, so free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. To have true, real freedom. Church, this is my hope for you, that in this season of your life where it feels like financial pressure is weighing down on you, and you might be saying to yourself, it must be nice, it would be easy if I could just have a little bit more money. Just want to remind you, you don't have an income problem. You don't have an income problem, right? We have a spending problem, and that spending problem is very spiritual. And so if we would allow God's space and place in our lives, and we would begin to embrace these biblical values of acting our wage, this idea of self-control, self-sacrifice, and long-term planning, you'd be surprised what you could accomplish in a short amount of time to find yourself in a place where you finally have some financial freedom, and you finally are investing not just in your future, but in the future for your children, for your community, and for your church. Let's pray. Father, right now, I know, again, this concept of talking about money is so personal and so private and so awkward and so uncomfortable for so many of us. But Lord, would you give us just peace and comfort as we are authentic in all things, that we could continue to have this conversation about not only making a budget, not only planning for the future, but using this tool, the debt snowball, to just get out of debt, Lord, so that we could honor you with our lives. And like your word says in Proverbs 13:7, Lord, that Lord, help us to not pretend like we're rich and really have nothing. Instead, Lord, if we could just live like we're a little bit poorer for just a short amount of time, we could really experience the blessings and the riches that you have in store for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, thanks for taking time to be with us today. Thanks for taking time to just open your heart up to what God might say to you about your finances and to be dreaming about what your future could look like. If you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if this topic was just struck a chord and hit some buttons, hit us up in the link below. There's an email that you can email us if you want more help, more info. If you want to sign up for Financial Peace University, we'd love to get you some help with that. We'd like to help you plan a budget, get you some tools in your hands to help you do some of those things and get you on the step in the right direction where you aren't feeling so absolutely and totally strapped. All right, guys, we'll see you real soon.